Victor, always great to see you. You know, I told you just a minute ago, I've been so excited to have this conversation because very few people can bring not just the perspective, but you are such an amazing historian that to me, this is the beauty of you as a guest, is that there is something about weaving in the past and what it means to this conversation. And so I want to start with the discussion that has occurred with Russia and Ukraine. The president had Mr. Fogel released and then said he had a conversation with Putin. The thing that's interesting to me is that everyone wants to attack Donald Trump for trying to have a relationship with Putin. And in my mind, if you have a foe who potentially could do you harm, wouldn't you want a relationship with them? Wouldn't you want them to not want to hurt you or to hurt your country, your interests? And I feel like for some reason, no one respects the fact that Trump wants to not just get along with Putin, but wants to prevent the U.S. from being harmed by him.
Yes, and Russia is an adversary, but in the large sweep of contemporary history, they didn't have a lab in a Russian city that killed 1 million Americans as the gain-of-function Wuhan lab did. And they have not killed 750,000 people over a decade at the rate of 75,000 a year, which Mexico's cartels have done with the, I don't know, wink and nod of the Mexican government that either can't or will not shut that border. That's one thing to remember. The other thing is, it's kind of Orwellian because when you look at Donald Trump and vis-a-vis Russia and you tune out all of the hysteria and the fantasies of the Steele dossier and all that, it was the Obama-Clinton team that dreamed up this idea of Russian appeasement, which they called Russian reset. And when you look at the actual, we've had 4 prior administrations, and Vladimir Putin left his borders to go into Ossetia in Georgia under George W. Bush, who was weakened by the Iraq War the last year in 2008. He went in 2014 under Biden. He went in 2022. The only administration he didn't dare do it was Trump's first term, nor has he done it anymore. So I don't quite understand that. And the second thing is, if you look at the actual treatment of Vladimir Putin vis-a-vis these various administrations. I mean, George W. Bush, whom I like, but he said he looked into Putin's eyes and he saw a great man.
Soul, yeah.
Soul, kindred soul. He said the same thing. Hillary took that jacuzzi button in Geneva and said, reset, reset, and then they appeased Putin. Trump came in, he got out of that asymmetrical missile deal. He killed 200 to 300 of the Wagner group in Syria. You remember that?
Yeah.
You were part of that administration. And then he kept these sanctions on oligarchs. He flooded the world with cheap oil. He really did more to weaken Putin than almost anybody. I mean, he didn't tell Putin, as Biden did, if you're going to conduct cyber wars, make sure you take these things off your target list. Or he didn't tell Zelensky, we'll fly you out. Or he gave the offensive weapons that Obama wouldn't do, the javelins. And so there's no historical record that suggests that Donald Trump was ever easy on Putin. And the weird thing about these leaders are that these tough dictator type leaders are, when you want to deal with them, they would rather deal with somebody who knows who they are, because they feel that when they take advantage of weak leaders like Biden and Obama, the American people will not honor those agreements because they feel they've been sold out. And and remember Obama during the hot mic with Medvedev in Seoul of 2012 in March, he said to him, tell Vladimir that this is my last election. If he'll be flexible, i.e. don't invade right away until I'm elected, I will be flexible on missile defense. In fact, they both kept their bargain. He dismantled the Czech and Polish initiative, which would have come in handy now with Ukraine. And in addition to that, Medvedev and Putin did not invade why Obama was up for re-election. So they've distorted the historical record. And Donald Trump, that's why he can negotiate with Putin, because Putin is, it's not that he respects him, he's afraid of Donald Trump. He doesn't know what Donald Trump might do at any given moment. And the others were predictably weak.
Yeah. The thing that's interesting that you noted, and I bring this up to people all the time, and I'll say, look, you don't have to like Donald Trump, but think about the record 4 years of him and the 4 years of Biden. When Donald Trump was president, there wasn't one major foreign incursion, right? No invasions, no attacks, no borders taken over or missiles fired. I mean, yes, North Korea shot stuff into the ocean. Joe Biden comes into office. Russia invades Ukraine, failed with Afghanistan withdrawal. Hamas attacks Israel. North Korea is provocative. China's openly talking about domination by 2027. And people will say, oh, you can't give Trump credit. And I'm like, why not? Like, for exactly the aforementioned reason. But as a historian, I get the present time, Victor. But as somebody who has looked at how history plays out, if we look back in 50 or 60 or 100 years, will people say Trump's foreign policy kept America safe? Because I wonder, is it the people who write it are still going to hate him? Or will at some point there'll be this enlightenment that say, you know what, maybe he actually knew how to handle these folks?
Yeah, I think it takes about a generation or two to get the truth out. And it took that long. When I grew up, everybody said only the New Deal got us out of the Depression. It was only the New Deal. And all the right-wing Republicans put Japanese Americans in camps. And then by 1990, people were saying the New Deal caused the second recession of 1938. The war got us out, not the takeover of the private sector by the Roosevelt administration. And then they were telling us, no, it was not the right that put Japanese Americans in camps. It was Earl Warren as Attorney General of California. It was FDR as president, and it was the left-wing McClatchy newspapers. But that didn't, when I was in high school, that nobody would believe that. Now nobody doesn't believe it. So I think it'll take a while. But the reason hysteria is that Donald Trump might negotiate a institutionalization of the Crimea and Donbass and make a deal that way. But again, it's a distortion of history. When Obama allowed Putin to go in there in 2014 in Crimea, and he was still president for 2 more years. It was never the position of the Obama White House that we will arm Ukraine to the teeth so they can get back that captured territory. They wrote it off. In fact, they didn't even give them offensive weapons. They refused to. It was not the position of the Biden administration to get those areas back by arming Ukraine until October 22nd. The idea that you're going to get all back, that is a post-February 24th, 2022 construct. And
that's interesting that you say that, because Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, said that this week. He said, look, I think, and this is what I was going to ask you this, but you're touching on it now, but he said it's unrealistic to think somehow we're going to go back to the pre-2014 borders, right? It just is
yes,
not.
Absolutely. He's just echoing the official warning that Barack Obama gave us and that Joe Biden gave us.
Look, Victor, I see this, you see this, Pete Hegseth sees this, Donald Trump sees this, but the media pretends that oh my God, when you settle, if you allow Russia to take land that they annexed, what precedent have you set? And I'm like, I get that. I don't want there to be a precedent, but the reality is that I don't see any short-term fix to this war, to the end of the loss of life. If we don't cut a deal, we say, yeah, you get to keep this, but it'll mean the end of the war.
Yeah, well, the other irony is that the so-called warmonger Trump is the only major political figure in the last 4 years, 3 years, who have actually lamented the carnage. And it's much greater than we're reporting from the sources that come out to the Hoover Institution from Ukraine. We're looking at 1.5 million or 1.7 dead, wounded, and missing on both sides in aggregate. And Donald Trump is always talking about that. He said it's a level, but I never heard Obama lament that. I never heard, all it was is we've got to make sure we punish, bleed out Putin. We've got to attrite the Russian monstrosity. But Trump is looking at it in humanitarian terms. And the second thing is, the reason that Joe Biden and Barack Obama did not want to arm Ukraine to get back those areas was, first of all, they thought it would be impossible. Second of all, they said repeatedly, this is before February 24th of 22, that Russia had 7,000 deliverable nuclear weapons, and it was a special case. And third, and I think this is very important, they wrote extensively, they being their supporters, that it was ambiguous because Crimea had been Russian since the 18th century. And it had been Russian until 1989. And then for 3 years, it was the republic of an independent autonomous nation called Crimea. And there was a race between Putin's little green men and the Ukrainians to claim it. And before Crimea could make a decision, Ukraine grabbed it smartly. They grabbed it, but there was a divided population. And when you go to the Donbass, the only reason that when the Soviet Union fell apart, that the Donbass was part of the province of Ukraine because it was a Soviet republics, was Khrushchev was born near the border, and he was trying to make sure that there was not an Ukrainian national movement against the communist government. So he said, we're going to give the Republic of Ukraine, which is part of the Soviet Union, jurisdiction over the Donbass to flatter them or to feed their nationalistic, so they stay within the Soviet Union. And no one in their right mind ever thought the Soviet Union at that point in the 1950s was going to break apart. But what I'm getting at is there was a sizable majority in areas of Donbass and Crimea that were Russian speakers. They had been traditionally Russian. And the idea that you were going to put NATO right up on the borders of the former Soviet Union and the Russian Federation, and those were going to be forever, those areas were going to be forever Ukrainian and thus part of NATO. It was not a sustainable idea. And everybody knew that. And people who were sober and wise said, do not, and I'm talking across the political spectrum, do not put them in NATO, do not overthrow the government, do not get into the internal affairs of Ukraine, do not get your family working with an oil, don't, just keep out of it and try to work with Putin. And maybe you can make a deal where you say they won't be in Ukraine and they will be a neutral Switzerland or Austria, neither Warsaw Pact or NATO. That was the discussion. And then when he went in, he thought he could go in because he thought he could get away with it, because he got away with it under Bush and Obama, and he did get away with it under Biden. So Trump is a late comer to this geostrategic game, but he did something that none of the others did. He kept Putin within his borders, and he threatened Putin. We know that now. Trump brags about it. He said, they've asked him on a number of occasions, why did Putin stay there? And he said, well, I mentioned something about hitting the Kremlin. And then Putin was reportedly said, well, Donald, you don't mean that. He kind of smiled and said, maybe, maybe not. But he deterred Putin.
Right.
And Putin had fear of Donald Trump.
Yeah, so did Xi, I think, in China. And anyway,
yes, he did.
Speaking of things that haven't been done before, Trump throws this proposal out on the table I think it was now, I can't even keep track of days. So what was the end of last week about Gaza? And he's saying, hey, we should go in, rebuild Gaza, make it, figure the whole thing out, use it for a variety of purposes, make it the Riviera over there. And then the king of Jordan comes over and starts talking about maybe resettling 2,000 people. He's going to meet with the president of Egypt, El-Sisi, at some point soon. So the question I have for you is this just a brilliant negotiating strategy, or do you think that there's something there to actually having a piece of Gaza?
Well, what Donald Trump does, Gulf of America, Canada, Mexico, Gaza, he looks at impossible situations and then he lights a fire and he takes the extreme position. And when I wrote a book about him, I read all 11 books, The Art of the Comeback, The Art of the Deal, The Art of the Second, all of that. And it's there. And so what he's saying with Gaza, it's a rubble, and your solution for it has never worked because you're going to pour UN money, EU money. You're going to say that Hamas can't go in. They're going to be there. They're already there. They're going to come back. They're going to terrorize the population. And then 20 years from now, we're going to have another October 7th. So what I say is it's rubble. Remove the population, make a Dubai with international money, not UN money, international money, and then screen people who want to come back so that they're not going there to, and all of a sudden people were saying this is genocide and the squad. But now, like everything he says, they start talking about it, and that was his point. So now, the same thing with Mexico. Oh my God, why would you put a well, I didn't know they had $170 billion surplus. I didn't know we sent 60. This is what the American people are saying now. You mean that we send back, or we take in illegal aliens, we give them state, local, federal support, housing, food, healthcare, and they free up that money and send back 63 billion to Mexico? I didn't know that the cartels have killed on an average 75,000 Americans and they take 20 billion out of our economy. And then they start talking. And then the Mexican government gets scared because they know it's an asymmetrical situation. So Donald Trump every day gets up and he scans the horizon for what I think he calls disproportionate, asymmetrical, unfair relationships. And then he tries to give the extreme warning, and then that's the beginning of negotiations, and then they try to restore parity, and that's all he's trying to do, parity.
So tomorrow is Saturday. Then he put this deadline for Hamas to release all of the hostages and said, if you don't, all hell's going to break loose. But then he had a phrase at the end that I thought was interesting, Victor. He said, but it's up to Israel, meaning this is my deadline. So the question that I was trying to figure out afterwards, is this we're going to come after you, or I'm taking the handcuffs off Bibi Netanyahu and saying, go for it, I'm not going to stop you?
Well, I think he understood, as did Bibi Netanyahu, that they were in a quandary because it was a bad deal from the beginning, because you can't trust Hamas. They will not release how many people are still alive. And yet the public opinion is overwhelming in Israel that they were willing to pay any price in a diplomatic sense to get back the hostages. So they had to do that. And I'm glad that everybody's happy they got back. But the point is that Hamas was staging these propaganda situations where these bullies that were hiding, now they come out because the IDF is temporarily restrained. They wear the uniforms, the mask, they do all the braggadocio, kill the Jews, all the crowds come back and try to hurt the hostages as they walk by. It's all performance art. And then they start releasing, trickling out, and then something stops. And they start to think, how many hostages do we actually have? Did we tell the Israelis the actual number? Do we have them? and they're emaciated. And now the president of the United States says they look like Holocaust victims. And the story is getting out that we tortured them, we starved them, we fed them terrible food, we abused them, and we're not going to be able to produce the number of hostages we said. So let's just stall and just stall and stall and stall, so we get Hamas firmly entrenched, because we're losing the propaganda war with this exchange, and we don't have that many hostages left that are alive, and we want to drag this out because we're losing it. And I think the Israelis, I don't know if it'll be Saturday, but at some point they'll put an end to it. They're just going to tell the Israeli people, they're lying, you cannot trust them, they're evil, they'll do it again, and we're going to have to eliminate them. And I think they can. I think they're going to be able to do that. And the other thing, and very quickly, is that Donald Trump was really. I mean, it wasn't just this. If you look at those executive orders, and I'm just speaking as someone who watched the activity on the Stanford campus every week, there is no. I mean, I would walk from my apartment to where the Hoover Institution, there were camps there. The statute said in Stanford, you cannot stay overnight. They were there for 4 or 5 months. They confronted people, river to the sea, death to Israel, Hezbollah, Hamas. They tore down posters, all with exemption. They trashed the president's office. They committed felonies. They desecrated this ancient colonnade, 19th century, beautiful sandstone. They spray painted it. They did everything with impunity. And now it's quiet. And the answer it's quiet is because Donald Trump has told people that if a university suspends anybody, that they will lose their student visa. If they're not in school, they don't have a visa. And he's going to send them back. And he's called their bluff. And now all of a sudden these Middle East wealthy kids from the Gulf and the aristocratic classes of, Egypt and Jordan, West Bank, all of a sudden it is, we hate the United States, we want to yell, and we hate the Jews, we hate Israel. But if we do that, they're going to call us our bluff, and we get to go back where we don't want to go back. So we're not going to do it. And then they complain, but the campuses are quiet. And so he's done with and then this is all in the shadow of no more DEI, and a lot of these students claim they're DEI as well. So he's completely defanged the anti-war movement, which was this tip of the spear on the campuses. And you talk to these kids, and they all say the same thing. Everybody is kind of happy about this. They don't want to say it, but the non-Middle Eastern students felt they were bullied, and they went along with it, and now they don't have to, and they won't be called names, and no one liked these people desecrating federal property or cemeteries, writing graffiti on the veteran cemetery. They don't like it, and now these people are kind of orphaned, and Trump did that. And the college presidents who damned Trump, secretly, all the administrators are very happy because he's weaponized them. All they have to do now is, well, we have a statute at Stanford or Yale or Harvard that says you can't camp out overnight and scream and yell and break apart classes. Now I don't believe that we should do that to you, but I have to have those rules, you see, because if I don't, Donald Trump is going to deport you. So please follow the rule, or I'm forced to, I'm going to object to it. I'll fight Trump, but he'll win, and you'll have to go back home. And that's how it's working it out.
You just laid it. I hope none of them listened, because you just laid it out perfectly.
Yeah.
I want to get to tariffs and Doge, but before that, just here's the one thing. Like, my pet peeve is I feel like China's telegraphing that they're going to come by 2027. Maybe it's a little later. Who knows? Maybe it's not. But I don't feel as a country we're prepared. So if Donald Trump called you and say, Victor, you're a student of military history, of world history, how do I position myself so that China is deterred? What do you say?
Well, that's a wide scale question.
And you have 60 seconds.
Yes, very quickly. He's going to have to reboot the military, so he has to tell Pete Hegseth, and Hegseth knows this, that more is better. That we don't have the luxury of building $177 million F-22s or $14 billion carriers, because the lessons of the Iran, Hezbollah, Houthi, Israel, Hamas war, and the Ukraine is you need thousands of drones. You can need drone submarines, drone ships, and we don't have those. We need to have drone platforms all over the South China Sea. They need to be equipped with hundreds of thousands of drones, and we can do that. And we don't want to put a $14 billion carrier or an F-22, 30 of them that could get shot down, and we'd lose, $1 billion or $2 billion. So it's the World War II paradigm where we outproduce the entire axis. All the belligerents in World War II had a smaller GDP than the United States put together by 1944. Yeah. So he wants to unleash the economy, cut out the DI, make a leaner Pentagon, but start buying weapons that make sense based on what we've seen happen, in Ukraine. When you have a $5 million tank, a Leopard or an Abrams, and you can have a $50,000 drone land on top of it and blow it up. Right. And you've got to make adjustments.
As opposed to a big carrier sitting out there. When we talk about, I think in Panama, it's largely about control of the canal. And I think we've at least started to address that. When he talks about Greenland and potentially taking it over, annexing it, or maybe even just increasing our footprint with our military base there, why, in your opinion, how strategic importance is this to our national security?
I think we do not want China and Russia in Greenland on the Arctic because of the geostrategic importance of the Arctic. We're starting to see the Northwest Passage open up. And I think Trump is trying to say, look, in World War II, Denmark did not exist. It was overrun in 3 days. It was not capable of defending itself, much less Greenland. So we stepped in and we took Greenland and we armed it and used bases, and we controlled the North Atlantic. So our ships that were vital to supply Europe were not being sunk because they were under air cover from Iceland and Greenland. And so it's happened before. And what he's trying to say to Denmark is, in so many different, it's very brilliant what he's doing. He's basically saying, hey, you guys, you always lectures us on imperialists. You're the imperialist power. And Greenland is in North America. It's in our continent, not yours. And New York is closer to Greenland than Copenhagen. So you've got this ahistorical situation, and you're not able to reflect the will of the people who probably want to be autonomous. They're not protected. I'll come in, and then they get paranoid. And what's happened since then? They put the Greenland insignia on their royal coat of arms. They've said they're going to have $1 billion in investment for Greenland, and they're going to give the United States a big concession for another base if we choose to. So I don't think Donald Trump ever, unless they offered it to him, wanted to buy it. I think what he wanted to do was tell the world that these people are hypocrites. They criticize the United States. They are imperialists. They're the ones that have their hands in North America. In the past, they were never able to defend it. They have this huge Texas, bigger than Texas. They have this huge country, and every time they've gone to war, they've lost it, and we've had to bail them out, and it'll happen again if we're not careful. So we've got to readdress the situation for everybody's self-interest. I think it's working.
Yeah. On the issue of tariffs, the conventional wisdom in the media and among the left is that slapping these tariffs on goods from other countries, aluminum, autos, etc., is going to cost Americans a ton of money, and small business jobs, etc. What do you think the effect of tariffs will have if he follows through the way that he's talked about?
Well, I don't think they'll have the catastrophic effect that they are. I think that these countries are so invested in export that they will actually cut the price on their end to to stay competitive. I think they're making a killing right now. So when you look at Europe and Japan and China, China 300 or 400 billion, Europe 500 billion surplus. So what Trump is basically doing, he's again surveying the landscape, and he says, Canada, there is no North America free trade. You have a $50 billion surplus, and all of your tariffs are asymmetrical. We don't do what you do to you. And he looks at Mexico and he says, you have 170 billion. You're helping China get around the tariffs while you let them bring in fentanyl. And you've got to have parity within a 10 or $20 billion margin. He's telling Europe, you do not let our cars go in. You put taxes and tariffs on our ag produce. You run up 500 billion, and yet we defend you. Canada, you keep yelling and screaming. You leave the border open. You're only spending 1.3 on defense of GDP. You're supposed to pay 2. You're under our nuclear umbrella. We defend you. So what he's saying is the world in the post-war era, we were able to subsidize all these people to get back on their feet, but it's so old now, so has been. And we're not going to do it anymore because we're not that wealthy. We're 37 trillion. He said that you should understand that we're going to correct it so we have parity. Sometimes the tariffs aren't even tariffs. In the case of Venezuela or Colombia, it's just, hey, you empty your jails. You thought that was cute to hurt the Yankee imperialists. Well, it's not cute, and I'm going to put a tariff on you till you take back your criminals. Same thing with Canada. You thought it was cute to have an open border. Suddenly, Trudeau finds $1 billion. Where did he get it? He said, I'm going to use $1 billion to patrol the border. Scheinbaum says, oh, by the way, I have 10,000 troops, and I'll stop the caravans. Well, why didn't you do that before? And Trump's point is that maybe you don't like me and I'm the bad cop, but these people look at magnanimity as weakness to be exploited and not to be reciprocated. And they're bullies. And we've got to call their bluff and say, you know what? You treat the United States well, we'll treat you well. For $1 of tariff, we'll have $1. And every one of these cases, he's not suggesting that we have higher tariffs than the country that does have tariffs on us now. What he's doing is saying, you got 2 choices. You either take the tariff down and we'll take it down, or we'll leave it up and it's up to you to cut your prices so that you're competitive with American steel, but it's your choice. And either way, we come out ahead. And so Biden said, he ran in 2020 that Donald Trump was going to ruin the economy. He was a protectionist. And then he kept all of tariffs in against China.
I know. That's
and then he bragged about it.
I know. That's no one wants to mention that those tariffs that he put in on China, Biden kept. And no one mentions the fact that, if they were so bad, why did Biden keep them? The last thing, when we spoke last, I think it was, I asked you about debt. And you went off in a way that only you can, explaining the issue of how concerning debt is to great countries and how they all fail. And I finally see an effort in this Doge, I don't know what we're calling it, a department that Elon is leading, to look at our government in a way that hasn't been probably ever, and see how horribly it's run, the inefficiencies, the duplicity, the waste, the fraud. And everyone in the media and the left freaks out and says, well, he might not have the authority to, as opposed to actually saying we're $36 trillion in debt. We run a $2 trillion deficit a year. The interest on the debt is more than we use for national defense, and applaud these guys. I find the reaction so fascinating because it's not to root out waste, fraud, and efficiencies isn't a conservative idea or a democratic idea. It's smart, it's common sense, and it's essential to our existential well-being going forward.
Yeah, they look at debt as a necessary way of redistribution. So the bigger the debt, then the higher the taxes, and then all the wealthy upper middle class and wealthy people supposedly have to pay more taxes to feed this monster. And then the second thing they do is they're very worried right now that the campuses are all-time low. That's one of their institutions. The media is bleeding audience. NPR, PBS it's going to have a showdown. And all of their institutions, the media, the foundations, big tech, they're having defections. And one of their great strengths is what we all call the administrative state. And that's what he's looking at with all these NGOs, and he's looking at USAID, and all of them are receptacles or sinecures for left-wing professors that join them, left-wing media people. You know, we were going to spend $250 million to fund Reporters Without Borders, 6,000 journalists we were going to train, all left-wing. We were paying 8% of the BBC's budget, which is, if anybody listens to it, it's anti-American nonstop. So what Trump is trying to do is say, there's two things we have to do. We've got to cut out all of this fraud and waste, and that's probably $1 trillion or even more. But more importantly, we've got to defang this monster because it operates as judge, jury, and executioner. And it tyrannizes the American citizen, and we don't want this government to be so big and dangerous. And that's why they're screaming. They know there's not a constitutional crisis. They understand that Joe Biden, he said on record when the Supreme Court said that it was illegal to cancel federal debt, he said, I don't care what they said. I have ways of getting around it. Ha, ha, ha. And when they said, well, he can't impound funds, Joe Biden came in and there was a law that the statute said that the Congress had appropriated money to finish the wall. He said, I won't build 1 foot, not 1 inch. And he impounded all of that federal money. He went over to Ukraine, that famous thing. He said, SOB, I'm going to fire, hey, Porchenko, I'm going to fire Victor Slokin. I'm going to hold up $1 billion of that was congressional money he impounded.
Yeah.
So they know that. They know that it's not the issue of impounding congressional, it's not the issue of criticizing the courts. Joe Biden called the justices out in his State of the Union, said, you justices, you better. Chuck Schumer went out in front of the Supreme Court and said, you don't know what's going to hit you, Schumer, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh. So they know that. It's nothing to do with attacking the judiciary. It's all about they're losing power and the ability to create this huge socialist state that they want.
Yeah. What a great way to end the week, Victor.
Yeah.
I always appreciate your insight, your perspective. Thank you for being so generous with your time, and have a great weekend.
Well, thank you, Sean. Good to be here.
You bet. Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.